Welcome. Welcome to this special session on B1 Preliminary. My name's Sarah Ellis and I'm the Senior Assessment Services Manager based in Italy. And I'm going to give you an overview of the B1 Preliminary exam. So let's get started. We're going to talk about B1 Preliminary and B1 Preliminary for schools. They're the same level, but they're two variations of the same exam. I'll tell you more about that in the session. So the idea is that I will give you basically a walk through the teacher's handbook. This will give you lots of information about the exam itself. We'll look at the difference between B1 Preliminary and B1 Preliminary for schools. We're also going to look at the different test types and the different tasks, and we'll have a look at how these are evaluated. We're going to also look at ideas for the classroom and some resources that you can use. We'll look at the testing criteria as well, and we'll have a look at those in the handbook. The important part is also that you feel confident that you can prepare your students for these exams. All the information you need is available in the handbook. So there are two handbooks, one for B1 Preliminary and one for B1 Preliminary for schools. These are free and can be downloaded from the website. You can also download the sound files as well if you like. So let's talk about the level. What is B1? What do we mean by that level? Well, if we look at it on the CFR, we can see there's a description that outlines that it's basically an intermediate level, and the students are able to use English confidently for everyday situations. And you can see here in the can-do statements that we're talking about routine tasks. We're talking about familiar and predictable situations. And of course, for listening, we're looking at straightforward contexts and listening to people's opinions and ideas as well. So, which exam should your students take? The choice is yours, and the idea is that you choose the best exam for your students. The difference between B1 Preliminary and B1 Preliminary for schools is very simple. It's basically based on the age group the test is designed for. B1 Preliminary for schools, as you might guess, is designed for students who are younger, perhaps still at school, who have less life experience than perhaps a student who's taking B1 Preliminary. However, you can choose whichever version you prefer. Please note, though, that the dates of the exams are actually different, so you have to make sure that you're preparing for the right date, but you can check that in the calendar. B1 Preliminary and B1 Preliminary for schools are part of the Cambridge English qualifications. And these are our exams related to the Common European Framework. And you can see here the Common European Framework and the Cambridge English Scale. The Cambridge English Scale gives just a little bit more information, a bit more detail about the actual level, but you can see that it's aligned with the Common European Framework. Here we can see the range of exams, starting from pre-A1 and going up to C2 on the CFR. These are the exams which are recommended for schools and for students still studying at school. Next to these you can see, if you like, the standard exams. So we had B1 Preliminary, B2 First, etc. And then next to those we have the exams for the world of work. So we have B1 Business English. Now the idea, of course, is that as you learn a language, you need a pathway to improve your competence and to basically become more able to use English. And the idea of the Cambridge English qualifications is to help every learner every step of the way to improve their English, to have a motivation to go forward, and to also have the proof that they are successful in their English. Now, if we look at it in the Italian context, you can see here the way the exams relate to Italian schools. So we have in the Scuola Elementare, we have the pre-A1 starters, movers and flyers. And in Italy particularly, pre-A1 starters is an exam that lots of children take. In the Scuola Media, we're looking at A2. This, of course, is A2 Key, or A2 Key for schools. In the Scuola Secondaria, you can have a look at B1 and B2. So we have B1 preliminary for schools, and we have B2 first, and B2 first for schools. And you can hear about those exams in another session if you'd like some more information. And then at the top, we look at going to university, and we have also B1 preliminary and B2 first, and potentially C1 advanced. So let's have a look at the quick overview of the exam. And one thing to say is that you have the choice between whether you do a paper-based version of the exam, or you might want to take a computer-based version of the exam. It's very important that you check with your local exam centre if they offer paper-based and computer-based. Again, the dates will be different, so you need to check. Does your centre offer the paper-based and the computer-based? And just check the date as well. The exams are, whether you do paper-based or computer-based, 4 skills. The only difference between the paper-based and the computer-based is that the speaking, the reading and the writing, I correct myself, the reading, the writing and the listening are on the computer, but the speaking is always face-to-face with a human, and that's whether you take the paper-based or the computer-based version. All 4 skills are tested, very important. Importantly, as with communicative language teaching, also in communicative language testing, the 4 skills are tested. So we have listening, we have reading, and we have writing and speaking, all tested. And in the tests, B1 preliminary, 25% for each skill. So each skill is equally important. So what's the exam like? Well, we'll have a little look at the detail of the times and the different tasks. So this gives you an idea of the timing. So we have a look here, we've got 3 papers. So reading and writing are tested together, and the total time of this paper is 1 hour 30 minutes. The listening paper is approximately 30 minutes, and the speaking test is 10 to 12 minutes. As I said before, it's 25% of each skill. So let's have a look at the papers in more detail. Reading and writing are tested together, as I said. And here we have 5 parts for the reading. And it's very important that you have a full range of different types of reading tasks. So students are skimming and scanning and using different skills. And we have a variety of different tasks to do there. The writing part of the paper has 3 different parts, and we'll look at them in detail. So again, different skills are being assessed here of their writing, and we'll see that they're all based on communication, as is the speaking test. Paper 2 is the listening paper, and there are 4 parts. There are different types of dialogue and monologues, and in different situations. And again, the idea is to use authentic situations where possible. This means, of course, that students need to do lots of listening and make sure that they're hearing a different variety of texts. What about the speaking? Well, the speaking is taken with 2 students and 2 examiners. Basically, you have an interlocutor, who's the person who's asking the questions, and you have an assessor, who actually doesn't take part in the speaking test, but will be sitting in the room listening to the students. There are usually 2 candidates. If, however, at the end of a session there is an odd number, the last 3 candidates will be examined together. Obviously, they will have longer time to allow for the fact that there are 3 of them. There are 4 parts in the speaking test, And again, the idea is different interaction patterns, production and interaction, and we'll look at that in more detail. And as you can see on the slide, it's taken sometimes in a group or sometimes in a pair. So the speaking is 10 to 12 minutes, and the idea is that there is interaction and production. So if you like, the 5 skills that we have. There is interaction with the examiner individually. There is also interaction with the other candidate, and there is also when they speak on their own as well. So different sections. What we're going to do now is have a look at a more detailed view of the paper, and I'm going to use the handbook to guide me in this description. So you'll be able to look at this information after the session. So looking at reading and writing first. Tested together, 1 hour, 30 minutes. Now you can see here that in the reading part, there are 5 different sections. It's very important that students are familiar with the different types of task, and that they also think about the time they use in the reading and part of the exam. It's recommended that they take about 50 minutes to do the reading and 40 minutes to do the writing. So I think that's quite helpful. If we look at each part very quickly, part 1 has a series of different notices, and students need to look at the descriptions and choose the appropriate answer. It's important that students look at the context of the text and use the image to help them understand. So if you like, it's always a good thing to start with the image, with the picture, and get the students to try and understand the context that it's being taken from, and then to look at the questions so that they can choose the most appropriate answer. Now I've got 2 examples for you. Here's one, and here's another example. So you've got a notice, and you've got a choice of 3 answers. So again, it's very important that the students look at the question first and try and understand where the text might be taken from, and then look at the questions so that they can choose the correct answer. Now, we have seen 2 examples, and one of them, of course, is from B1 Preliminary, and one is from B1 Preliminary for schools. You see the one on the left is B1 Preliminary, and the one on the right is B1 Preliminary for schools. So you can just see there's a slight difference in the type of language that we have, which is more appropriate for younger students in the B1 Preliminary for schools. Now, in the handbook that you will find, there are different pages, and if you use the version online, the digital version, you can click directly to the links and find the information quickly. So this is what it looks like. You can also go to the website, and if you go to the Italian Cambridge Assessment English website, you'll find that there's information available in Italian about the exam. So if you need to share it with colleagues or with parents or anything, it's also available in Italian. Looking at part 2, here we have basically 8 short texts, and we have 5 descriptions, in this case, of some teenagers. And the idea is, again, that the students will be skimming and scanning to find the information that they need related to the text. So if we look at the instructions, it's important that students look at the people first before we look at the text. So here we have the description of what the teenagers are looking for, and we see this way the students are prepared for what they're going to read for. So they're actually thinking about the reason for reading. So if they look at this part first, before trying to look at the other text, then look at the text and do the matching part. So we can look at some of the key words in the text. So we have in the first one, in number 6, we have words like his own age. So he wants some stories written by people whose own age have written. So what text would that match with? Well, if we look at the key words in the text, we can see that actually this is matching with text H, because here we have the teen magazine, the Teen Voice. We also have the fact that it talks about reviews of CDs, and we can see in number 6 that he's also interested in music. So we can do the matching like that. So getting students to think about those kind of clues. This is the whole task. The next task is actually, again, this time you'll see that the questions are on the left-hand side and the text is on the right. This is done so that it encourages students to look at the questions before they read the text. Again, so that they're thinking about why they're reading. This, as you'll see, this is actually a much longer factual text. And the idea is that you read the question, scan the text, and then look again to see that you've found the right match. So obviously we're looking at developing reading skills through this kind of task, as well as testing them. If we look at part 4, we have a, so there it is, you can see. First, then look at the text. First the questions, then the text. Okay, in the next one, this time we have the text on the left and the questions on the right. Again, it's designed to get the students to look at the text first this time, to scan it and to get the gist of the text before they start looking at the questions. This text is actually a little bit more challenging. The students are going to be looking for attitude and opinions, and so it's quite important that they first get the general meaning by skimming it, then think about the writer's purpose, and look at the deeper meaning of the text, which of course requires more detailed reading. There's a lot to do in the reading part paper, so students, the more that students are familiar with the order of the tasks, the more they can think about the timing of the way they go through the test paper. If we look at the next one, part 5, we actually have a gap text, and we have obviously some multiple choice options for putting the words in the gap. Now, often students rush to try and put the words in straight away, but again, it's important to discipline or to think about the need to read the text first to get the overall meaning, and then to start looking at the words, the missing words. It'll make it much easier to actually make sure that you're getting the right words. The words you'll see are mainly grammatical, mainly vocabulary. And they're mainly vocabulary, with some grammatical words such as pronouns, modal verbs, and prepositions, that kind of thing. But this basically is testing vocabulary in this section. Now we move on to the writing section. So having spent about 50 minutes, the students should be leaving themselves about 40 minutes to do the writing tasks. So, as you can see, there are 3 parts to the writing test. And if we look at the first one, this, if you like, is many students worry about this part because they see it as the kind of grammatical part of the test. But it's actually designed to get students thinking about paraphrasing in many ways, because you're also looking at grammatical precision, but fundamentally the task is asking you to complete the gapped text to make the sentence have the same meaning as the sentence above. Now, it's also important to read the instructions carefully, and we'll see that it says that there are no more than 3 words. So even if a student writes an answer which has more than 3 words and it's correct, unfortunately, it will be considered wrong. So they do need to pay attention to the fact that they mustn't use more than 3 words. And if we look at the first example, number 1, we see that, let's think about what we can put in the gap. So Nico's older brother showed or taught him how to play basketball. It's interesting that there may be more than one answer. This is very carefully researched, and if you look in the answer key, which you'll find in the handbook, you'll see if there's more than one possible answer. If we move to the second one, a classic example of the present perfect. Nico has been in a basketball team for 3 years. Now, you'll also notice that there's actually a common theme to these sentences. So again, it's quite important that at the beginning, the students recognise that there is a common theme and a common topic, which will help them in the task. Now we move on to the kind of freer writing tasks in this part 2. Here we have a communicative short message. It's important that the students read the question and use the question to help them, because it has 3 points that if they follow those 3 points, then they're going to be answering the question. There is a guide to how many words to write, and you'll see that it's 35 to 40 words here. So we're talking about a short message. So again, familiarity with this kind of task will help students think about who they're writing for, why they're writing it, and the importance of their register, that they're using the right register. If you're thinking about how it's marked, it's about the clarity of the message. It's not just about being grammatically correct. Minor errors that don't impede communication don't mean that you're going to have a negative mark. If they're not penalised if they're not impeding the communication. So small, minor spelling mistakes, for example, if it doesn't impede the communication in this task, it won't be penalised. Now, you can see here how the question guides the student, the 3 parts. So again, if students get used to looking at what's required in the question, that will help them think about planning their answer and making sure that they've answered the question. And again, they just need to be thinking about how big is their writing to write 35 to 45 words. If they think about it before and get used to writing that length of text, then in the exam they're not worrying about counting every word, because it doesn't need to be exactly 45 or 35. It's an approximate number. If it's too long, it's probably not answering the question. If it's too short, again, it might not be answering the question. So those are kind of key questions. Part 3 is a longer piece of writing, and here students are going to be writing up to 100 words, so a much longer piece. But the good news is that here they have a choice. They can either write an informal letter, and again there's a very clear rubric and instructions for them to follow, or they can choose to write a story. And this of course is in B1 preliminary for schools. The story appears here because again it's considering the type of student who might be taking the exam. So they have a letter or a story, whichever they feel more comfortable with. That's the best advice you can give your students, is choose the question you feel better at. It's important that as we encourage our students to think about planning and ensure that their answers are as well organised as possible, and that the content is relevant to the question. So just a couple of things to say about that. So if we look at the story question, the story could be either given a title, so you might be given a title and then you write the story, or you might be given the first sentence of the story, and then the student will write the story. If there are any names in the sentence or in the title, then obviously they should be used during the story, so that there's some consistency. So just little things like that to watch out for. The students, of course, will be writing their answers on an answer sheet, and the answer sheet has a space, so that will also help them limit the number of words they write, Obviously, the idea is around 100 words. Again, same problem as part 2. If it's too long, probably it could be irrelevant, and if it's too short, maybe they're not answering the question. Okay, so part 3, here you have the 2, and as I said, watch out for the number of words. There is a word limit. It's to give a guide. What about the assessment? For the teacher, in the handbook, you will find the assessment criteria for the writing. And this is clearly laid out. And you've also got some sample texts. So here we have a part 2, and we have a candidate's piece of writing in the handbook. Obviously, we'll be able to read that at your leisure. But you will also have a sample of marking. So here's a mark with a commentary, and you'll find other samples like that in the handbook. This is useful for you as a teacher, and perhaps nearer the exam time, you may even ask your students to match the commentary with the text, or ask your students to see if they can give a mark and see. It will get them to be more aware of how the assessment is taking place on their writing. So a very useful activity. So you can see here the criteria. It's obviously the content, the communicative achievement. Are they answering the question? Have they been relevant to the question? Also the organisation, how well is it organised? Have they used the right kind of language, the right range of vocabulary? Is the register correct? So here's your clear criteria. And you can see it here, that the content is very important. Now, if you're thinking of preparation, if you haven't discovered it yet, one of the biggest tips I can give you is to recommend that you use Write and Improve. This is a website which offers a free resource for teachers and students. And basically, for any level, you can choose different tasks. Many of the tasks are appropriate for B1 preliminary. And write your answer, send it to the computer, and the computer will come back immediately with some feedback. And you can just see an example here. It will not correct everything. This is not a translation tool. It's a learning tool, and the idea is it will give constructive feedback on areas that perhaps are a little bit weak. Perhaps if there's a particular grammar error, it will highlight it. And the student can edit their writing, send it back, and get more feedback. And you can see at the bottom that you can see how your progress in you're making in improving your writing. Fantastic resource. I can only recommend you have a look at this. You can see it will tell the student how many words they've written, so again they don't need to be worrying about how many words they've written. It will also tell you if it's relevant to the question. The computer is able to recognise relevance, and again it will give you some tips on the right. It will give you the CFR level roughly, with some comments on how your writing is progressing. So again, as I said, fantastic tool, and it's free. So moving on to listening, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to give students opportunity to listen to a variety of tasks, and not to only use listening as a test. Otherwise, students begin to fear listening. So it's very important that they do have lots of activities. Obviously, with the internet, there may be activities that you can ask them to do at home, or that they might be able to do on their own. And there are plenty of resources related to B1 preliminary, which can help your students do more practice. But it's really important to do lots of listening. And in the actual listening test, it takes about 30 minutes, and there's and the students will actually write their answers on the question paper. And at the end of the listening test itself, there is a 6-minute period, a 6-minute time for them to transfer the answers from the question paper onto the answer sheet. It's very important that they watch the clock, that they learn that there is 6 minutes and that's it, and if they haven't finished, they will be stopped. But it's just to be careful while they're doing the transfer of their answers. So let's have a look very quickly at how the listening test is broken up. As I said, it's showing a range of spoken contexts, announcements, discussions, conversation, obviously related to everyday life. This is B1, but obviously a variety of contexts. The first part is a series of different texts, and I just look at my handbook, and it basically reflects a variety of listening situations, and every text is heard twice. So that's also quite encouraging. And in this first task, there are 7 short listenings, and the students are basically listening and listening for specific information, and they are choosing between 3 images. So again, the image can help the students prepare for what they might expect to hear. So you can use the picture to help them predict the kind of thing they'll answer. The kind of thing you can do in class is obviously encourage them to look at the picture, try and predict the kind of thing that they might hear, and that also to listen the second time to check that the answer they've chosen is the right one, that they're not just word spotting, hearing a word and think, oh, it must be picture 1, when perhaps they need to listen a little bit more and get the actual full answer. Students usually like this part, I have to say. But anyway, it's very interesting and it's very good for encouraging students to think about predicting. Part 2 is a longer text, and you'll see it here. So you can, that's more detail. You can see it more easily. And you can also see an example of the tape script. I forgot to mention that in the handbook, you will not only find the sample questions, you will also find the tape script. So as I mentioned earlier, you can download the sound files, so the audio files are available freely for these texts, and so you can have a look at the tape script. You perhaps can use that in your lesson, a part of your lesson, helping students look at the text and identify where they're finding the answer in the text. So again, a useful tool for the teacher for developing listening. So, part 2, as I was about to say, is a much longer text. This is usually a monologue or an interview of something like that. And here we're having to choose from a multiple choice set of questions. So it's quite important that the first time students are listening for gist, perhaps, and then checking the second time that they have chosen the appropriate answer. There is a pause before the listening text starts, and it's important that students get used to using that time to read the question so that they skim the question, they have an idea of what they're going to be listening for before they actually hear the tape script. Again, they hear it twice, so they've got the chance to listen for gist the first time and then check and focus on the specifics during the second listening. Now, in part 3, we have a text which is, actually I'm going to give you some tips before. These are some useful activities related to the task we've looked at before. Listening for clues in the text to keep track. Students often worry if they've not heard a part. Okay, never mind. Keep going. You might have missed a chunk, but just don't give up. Just you might hear the next part. So looking for a clue in the text. Also, as I said, paraphrase is important. And paraphrase in listening, again, if you're using the tape script, you might be able to show how in what you hear on the text and what you see in the picture or in the text, in the question, how they have been paraphrased. So that also are useful techniques for students. And the last, of course, is checking the second time, not being too complacent that the first answer is always the right one. Okay, so looking at this part 2, you will have basically a text with gaps. If you like, it's a bit like having notes with missing information, and this is usually something service-wise. It could be information about an event or a tour or something of that kind. So an information gap, if you like. So the kind of things that students are going to be listening for here are notes, information, numbers. One of the things, again, that this kind of question can be used for the students is to predict. if they look at the gaps, they can predict the kind of words or numbers, or maybe there's a short phrase that will fit in the gap, that they can use the text to help them predict the kind of thing that they might hear. So again, a useful exercise to do with your students while you're preparing for the exams, but also a life skill as well. Now we move into part 4, and part 4 is actually a conversation here. You would have some kind of interaction, usually with a man and woman's voice to make it clear so it's easier to follow. And the students need to get the gist of the conversation. It's usually informal, and they're looking for correct or incorrect according to the statement that's written in the question. They're looking at gist and detailed meaning here. So getting used to this kind of question. Obviously, it's a little bit more challenged because it's also listening for attitudes, opinions and agreement. The other thing to say about listening in general at B1 is the test is not designed to trick students. It's designed, the questions are in the order that the text appears. Again, that should help the student follow the text through as they look at the questions. So it's very not about tricking them and asking them difficult questions. Okay, looking at speaking. The speaking part of the test is very important. It's obviously when you're younger, B1 preliminary students often are at school, they may be shyer. The test is designed to encourage the students to perform as best they can in a variety of different interaction patterns. And you can see that there are 4 parts to the test. I've shown you here on the slide is actually the rubric for the examiner. The examiners have a text that they follow so that they can guide them through the speaking test, so that the test will be of the same format for every student. Obviously the questions won't be the same, but the format is the same, and so students know what to expect as well. I think that if we look at the rubric here, you can see that there's obviously questions for the student A and student B, so there's turn taking throughout the speaking test as well. The first part is, if you like, a social conversation. The students are talking about themselves, about their own interests. It's the kind of conversation you would expect to have when you first meet someone, so very natural. Students are encouraged not to try and memorize chunks of language. That's not an examiner will recognize when a student is just repeating something that they have learnt, so that they can show it in the test. And that is not to be encouraged at all, because it should be as natural as possible. They should be used to answering questions about themselves, their likes, their interests, their hobbies, about their school and their family, etc. So in part 2, the students are given a situation, which you can see here. And they will also be given some images to go with the description. I'll just have a look at this one here. And here we have the examiner will read the description to the candidates. So a boy is leaving the school because his parents are going to work in another country. The students in his class want to give him a present. Talk together about the different presents they could give him, and then decide which would be best. So there are very clear instructions, and here is a picture with some ideas to help you. Now the picture is really just to give them something to talk about. They can add their own ideas as well, but again it gives them some ideas to help the flow of the conversation. And as you heard, decide together which you think was best. So they're giving their opinion, exchanging opinion, and also coming to a decision, deciding together. So that's what that task is about. And then in part 3, we move on to actually individually. Students will talk on their own about something. They have a photograph to describe, and the examiner will tell them what the theme is and ask each candidate to speak about the picture they have. The pictures are chosen to be appropriate for the age group. So in this particular example, the bedroom scene you see is obviously a teenager's bedroom, and the student will talk about it. They're not expected to know everything, every item of vocabulary. They will be given, it's positive if they can use paraphrase if they don't know the vocabulary, but if they can show a range of vocabulary when they describe the picture, that's very important. Here's the second candidate's picture, and the second candidate is invited to describe the picture. And then together in part 4, we stay with the theme that has been set up in part 3. And this time the students are going to talk together about the theme, and the examiner sits back and listens to them discuss the topic. So the part 4, or 3 and 4, take about 6 minutes. So there's not too long, but there's lots of opportunity to show their range of skill. Now, the assessment criteria are available in the handbook, and you can also watch example videos of the speaking tests on the Cambridge English TV YouTube channel, where you can watch the test, and there is also commentary on the performance of those students, and those are really very useful for you as a teacher. You may decide you also want to share those with your students, perhaps nearer the exam, just so that they can see how it works. And they can be more confident. So talking about preparation very briefly, a few things to say. There are at B1 very clear language specifications. So you can see all the grammar that is tested at B1 is listed in the handbook. You will see the functions, etc. You will also find a topic list. Again, the topics are similar to B1 preliminary and B1 first for school. B1 preliminary for schools also are similar, but obviously the ones that are more related to the age group are highlighted here. And you will find there is a vocabulary list for B1, very specific vocabulary list, which is really very helpful because you can see topic areas of vocabulary covered in that vocabulary list, which will obviously help you with vocabulary development for B1. A quick word about the results. The results are issued against the CFR. Obviously, as we said at the beginning, the Cambridge English qualifications are aligned to the Common European Framework, and the Cambridge English scale scores just give you a little bit more information. So your certificate's looking like this. You're getting a grade or a mark, a score for each of the skills, and you get a total score for the whole level, and you can see here the achievement of the student on that sit. You can see how it's broken down into the Cambridge English score. Again, this information is in the handbook and on the website, and it shows how the grades are related to the Cambridge English scale and the CFR levels. For those students who are not achieving B1, but are still achieving performance at A2, they will receive a certificate, a Common European Framework certificate. It doesn't say B1 preliminary, but it's a certificate to show that they have achieved basically A2. For those students who are performing a very high score, they will get a certificate with a B2 pass. As you will see from the Cambridge English scale, this is at the beginning of the B2 range, and obviously awards those students who are doing particularly well at B1. And you can see this better on this diagram, and you can see that better there. And you will also find that if you would like some actually activities as a teacher, you can look either in English or in Italian at the website and look at B1 in this search engine here. You can specify what exam or level you're interested in, what skill you're interested in, and basically this will give you a list of all the materials available free for you to use in your preparation. This is the Cambridge English website, Italian website, obviously available in Italian, and the cambridgeenglish.org website is obviously the version in English, so you can use whichever you prefer. And also, we seem to have gone back that way, this is worth you knowing about, which is the weekly Cambridge English Weekly is another new website which allows you to specifically search for materials for a particular exam, and it basically is available for A2, B1 and B2. But what you can do, and it's fantastic, is that you can specify how many weeks you've got before the exam, what skills you're interested in, and Weekly will produce you a little program like this one, which if you click on any of those parts, you will go directly to the free teacher's material, and it's all organised for you in a usable way. So we're coming to the end of the session, but just to remind you that, of course, Cambridge Assessment English is about helping students learn and prove their English ability to the world, and we wish you and your students every success. We hope this video will have been useful, and as I said, please do have a look at the handbook and the website, and thank you very much.